Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to this. This is the inaugural first session of a kind of occasional content conversations series that we're going to do with founders of kind of startup exhibitions. So today I have with me Sebastian Sbuttoni. Do you prefer Seb or Sebastian?
Seb is fine.
Fine, great, okay. So Seb is the co-founder and conference director at Future Proof Group Media, who have a few different brands. I think I've got four different brands, largely in the kind of sustainability space. So we've got Future Protein Production in Europe and US, Protein Production Technology, Future Food Production, and Sustainable Data Center Technology. So we've got these four brands, all in this kind of sustainability space. And all you're using the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a guiding principle for all of these shows. So tell me a little bit about the brands and the shows, first of all, and then we'll get a little bit into your kind of story, the backstory.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be your first guest. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, our shows, they're all focused around sustainability, yes. I suppose at the heart of them all is climate tech. And that is such a big topic nowadays. So we try and break that down into key niches where we can bring together a really high quality audience. So the Future of Protein Production and Protein Production Technology International are both focused on alternative proteins. One is our event brand, one is our digital resource brand. So with magazines, digital magazines, webinars, and digital content. The Future of Food Production is more focused on ag tech. So that's things like vertical farming and regenerative agriculture. And then Sustainable Data Centers is a process that's, a project that's in the works at least.
Right, okay. So these are all topics that are quite dear to my heart from a previous life before doing Lineup Ninja, but that's the story for another day. Tell me your kind of origin story. Why are you doing this? Why did you start this company to do these events?
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose there's not one clear answer to that. But yeah, I started off in events with just developing programs, and then I launched a few shows focused on, again, in sustainability, but in very different areas of sustainability, because it's such a broad term now and broad topic. It almost touches on everything that we're doing. So they were more about plastic waste and greener manufacturing technologies, those sorts of areas. But of course, when you're creating things, you have your own ideas around areas you'd like to have an impact with. And as I said, climate tech is such a big topic, and I knew I wanted to do something in that area. And then food has such a big impact. It immediately presents itself as an area where relatively small changes can have a very big impact. So within that, alternative proteins is an extremely exciting sector for food production, and the things happening in cell cultured proteins, in fermentation derived proteins, and of course we've already seen some of the plant-based proteins hitting supermarket shelves, and I think we're all quite familiar with them. But there's a lot of room for growth there. So it's really exciting for us to have positioned ourselves in that area. And some of the companies we work with are definitely set to have a big impact on the way we produce food. So that's really what we want to be able to facilitate, the connections to help them grow as fast as possible. So that's sort of why we position ourselves in these very niche topics, but they're very fast growing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a huge growth area at the moment, isn't it? Take me back to, because if I've got this right, Future Proof Group Media founded in 2021.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And so prior to that, I've been looking at you on LinkedIn. So you're a conference director at Trans Global, and prior to that, a couple
Mhm.
of years at UKI Media.
That's right. Yeah.
But so I'm guessing you're at Trans Global Media. It's 2021. We're in the middle of the pandemic.
Mhm.
At some point, you decide I'm going to start a new company and start doing my own shows.
Mhm.
Tell me that story.
Yeah. Well, Trans Global Events they're a fantastic team. Um, Effectively, that was a company launched by the CEO and then two of us, and there were two additional employees. So there were three of us on that team, sort of taking over content, sales, and overall management of the company. And it was fantastic because you get to grips with so many different areas of creating a business and creating shows.
Mm,
So that was a really steep learning curve for me. And then I was there for a couple of years, and sort of towards the end of that, the pandemic struck, and we had to completely reevaluate how we were running shows. And of course, as everyone in the events industry did, we had to switch to run these events online.
mm,
And during that process, I it became apparent that you can do these with relatively small teams, um, and you can create a really high value offering of good quality content digitally, which can which if you can put it in front of the right audience, you can bring together people online and share content. I suppose that I still believe that online content is not the best way to network and to
mm,
um, bring people together that way, but definitely for sharing content, it serves a purpose because when we did go on to create our first virtual shows, which the first show for the future of protein production was virtual,
mm.
um, we were able to include a global audience, and people were able to meet virtually that they were familiar with each other and they maybe knew of each other being in the industry, but they'd never met. So you can connect dots that otherwise wouldn't meet at a traditional exhibition. Um, and yeah, that was sort of the gateway to us launching shows. So that was the transition from FPG to that was the transition from Trans Global Events to FPG.
Got you. So it's almost like the pandemic gave you this opportunity for this to do these like global brand activations ahead of moving into sort of face to face post pandemic, which I think you've done now. So you're having
Absolutely.
in person events. Um, so it sounds a little bit like almost you because it's Trans Global. That was a startup as well. So
It
you've
was.
kind of almost like done an apprenticeship in doing a startup. You'd already kind of been through the process once with another co-founder. Do you think that was key in giving you the confidence to do this, or?
It was, of course. I wasn't a co-founder at Trans Global.
Mm,
Um, I was employee 001, but
yeah,
I wasn't a co-founder. So you sort of think you understand the challenges and you have sort of a grasp about what's going on there, but it's very different when you do it for yourself. But definitely it gave me some confidence to go ahead and give it a go.
yeah. Um, and so, what contrasting the two experiences, then, what have been your main kind of oh shit, I didn't realize it was going to be like this moments when you were doing FPG Media?
Yeah, that's a
What was
really
kind of
good question.
those horror stories that you weren't anticipating maybe?
Yeah. Um, I suppose it's the managing a team, managing accounts, spinning lots of plates, basically.
Mm,
Um, Sourcing new software was something that we considered previously, but when you're setting up systems from scratch, it's very different. Something that was fairly useful at TGE was um, we were able to lean on a broader company, which is UKI, who are probably one of the UK's largest privately held
mm,
uh, event organisers, and they were a supporter of TGE. So that was very helpful to lean on their teams when needed. But of course, going alone, you don't have that. So of course, we had to quickly scramble together systems that we believe worked, or at least worked for the time being.
yeah.
And that's probably one of the biggest challenges.
Mm, interesting. Um, So you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm interested in the sort of strategy for the business. So future-proof group media. It's the pandemic. You're passionate about sustainability, and presumably you've spotted these niches that you believe are underserved. Is that based on, were you already kind of active in those markets? Like, how did you identify that, or is it a little bit of taking a chance, sort of giving it a go?
Yeah, we weren't active in those markets at all. But what we've begun to do is create an audience with content. So with newsletters, with webinars, and then through a virtual show. So we could very quickly begin to establish and create an audience for our content. I think that's a really nice way to transition from a start to an in-person show. Of course, you want to get a feel for if your content is resonating with that audience. So to do that digitally is a really good way to get a feel for what people want to hear.
Okay. In my notes, when I was kind of thinking, what questions am I going to ask Seb? I was kind of thinking about startup strategy and how, in my mind, from my own experiences of doing a startup, I can envisage like a spectrum, and at one end of it is like, we know there's a business opportunity here. We've got a really clear idea of what the market is, how much we can charge, who we're going to sell to, what are our channels, all that kind of good stuff. And then right at the opposite end, which is much more like what we did, is more like a kind of lean startup approach. I don't know if you're familiar with the book by Eric Ries, Lean Startup, where it's like, we've got an idea, we don't really know who's going to buy it, we don't even know if it's going to work or how to price it or anything about it, and everything's an experiment. So where would you sort of place yourselves on there? It sounds like you're a bit more towards the experimental end.
It was definitely towards the experimental end, with the benefit of understanding conference content, how that's priced, how it is presented to companies, and also some form of understanding of who would be the ideal customers and would want to listen to our content effectively, and to listen to the speakers that we would bring together. We definitely want to take the temperature of a market and see how it's growing and who the interested stakeholders are. And for the future of protein production, which was our first brand, it was definitely evident that there were a lot of startups in the space. There were some bigger food processors that would want to be involved and seem to have an interest in investing in some of those startups, because they didn't want to get left behind in a transitionary period, as well as a lot of investors that wanted the same. So we quickly realized that the industry is far broader than we first thought, which is what I think has helped us to establish the brand. But yeah, it's always some form of experiment and risk and tweaking during that development process. And I certainly think for the first probably up to 12 months, we were tweaking our offering to try and make it as attractive to the audience as possible.
Yeah. We still are tweaking ours. That's kind of, I guess, with software, it's never finished, right? But the same with a trade show, a market is always evolving and stuff. So it sounds like you identified a very narrow niche that you thought, this is who we're serving, and then you got into that niche, relatively successful, and then we're able to broaden out from that, which is kind of classic strategy. What was the competition like at that point? Did you feel, was it, because often with exhibitions, there's going to be a few independent shows around, and there's going to potentially be some of the huge incumbents. The global exhibition organizers might well have a startup show in that space, or they might just identify someone like yourselves and go, "Oh, let's buy that and incorporate that into one of our portfolios." What was the market like when you started?
Yeah, there was some degree of competition. One thing that differentiates us is we have our focus on content. We always say that what we offer is a content-driven exhibition. So it's primarily a conference. So we pride ourselves on bringing together top quality speakers that people will pay to come and listen to. And by doing that, we attract high quality attendees that then are small exhibitions, and our exhibitors then are very happy to meet with them, and it's much more of a quality over quantity approach. So that was the way we differentiated ourselves. There were some associations that run trade shows in the area, in the industry, but probably only one or two. There are now more shows, and there was probably only one very well-established, larger conference trade show, which again, as you said, is run by one of the big boys.
Yeah,
that sort of events.
So you've kind of already answered my next question, which is about how do you position yourselves against those? And it sounds like you're going for very much high quality content.
Yeah.
So, how do you identify that, and how do you know what's going to resonate with the audience that you want to attract, and therefore put in front of your exhibitors?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, we are, and we tell our speakers this. We're conference and event organizers, and we produce digital media, but we want our industry to tell us what they want to hear. So we always make sure that we work with an advisory board for our conferences and for our magazines that have a varied perspectives and varied expertise on what's happening in the industry, and they can tell us the key areas that the industry needs to hear and wants to hear. You know, that they always are keeping us abreast of the developments and key topics for us to include.
Right. And what are the processes you use to kind of mine their brains for that kind of gold information they've got?
Yeah, it's different for everyone. Everyone works differently. So some we meet with regularly, and they update us, and some it's just at the beginning of the process of creating a conference. They might give us 5 or 6 key topics that they think we should include. Of course, it's always nice to have that sort of advice, and we go to them sometimes to, maybe there's companies that we really want to include that we don't feel like we're getting any traction with. Occasionally they can connect us with those, so that's always really valuable as well.
Is that in terms of traction, in terms of getting them to sponsor or exhibit, or
sometimes just getting them to speak?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes they might be startups, they might be small teams, or they're just very busy, you know, and it's can be difficult to make people's calendars align. But I think when a respected voice of the industry suggests that we could be a place they would want to promote what they're doing, then it gets their attention a bit better.
Right. So they're almost like acting as almost like a broker or agent, if you want to kind of.
I suppose so. It's normally a very friendly introduction, and then we take it from there.
Yeah, cool. So it sounds like it's primarily. So often I would break down conference processes into one of 2 broad areas, one of which I would describe as like a call for speakers or call for papers approach, like a more scientific academic version. And then the B2B conferences would tend to be more like editorially led. So it'd be, which sounds much more like what you've just been outlining. So you'll speak to your advisory board or the people, your advisors. It sounds like you're not having like a focus group and they're all kind of brainstorming topics, but it's more informal than that. Or
yeah, it's a bit more informal than that. Sometimes we do get together on calls and we try and get a few people onto a call, but it can be difficult to make 10 calendars align.
Sure.
So often it's just easier over email.
Yeah. So they'll suggest a whole bunch of topics. These are the hot topics in the future of protein production for this year. Would they also suggest speakers to you as well and say, "Oh, get this person in from here because she's amazing"? Or
yeah, absolutely. We really like it when we get someone recommended by one of our advisors.
And then from there, so you've got some draft session titles that come out of that process. They go on to kind of like start to build your agenda, and then you'll be inviting speakers. Or would you normally have a few candidate speakers for each of those topics, or would you just be like, an advisor says, get Jane in to speak about this because she's the absolute like complete industry expert. Nobody else is better than her, and if you bring her in, she'll bring like 100 different visitors. Is it that kind of conversation?
A little bit to some extent, but then, for example, at our show coming up in October, we'll have over 100 speakers. So the advisors, yes, they might suggest a few, but a lot of it does come from, we do a call for speakers like you mentioned. So we get a lot of proposals, and more than we could include. But then we do leave space for us to go and hand pick some of the top speakers. And of course, these are very fast moving industries. So things change between the 6 months when you start planning a conference and when you actually deliver it. So we try to make sure we have a little bit of flexibility in the agenda, even as we approach the show, so that if anyone has some really fantastic announcements, we can try and at least get them into the program.
Yeah, and I guess there must be a challenge there about you want to launch a draft program as early as possible to start promoting the show as well, right?
Yeah.
So how do you tend to manage that? Do you have like, here are some confirmed speakers, more coming soon? I guess you want to leave a bit of a tease as well to keep people interested and keep coming back to see what's been announced.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have to do it in stages. So maybe it's a preliminary list of speakers, more coming soon, a second batch of speakers, and then a preliminary agenda, and then a final agenda in the sort of 6 weeks before the show. But we want to make sure there's a balance of giving people as much information as possible to help them make their booking decision, and also help them to book early, because that's helpful for us as well.
Yeah.
And also allowing flexibility and allowing us to create a really top quality agenda, rather than just pulling together speakers because they've said yes, and we want to also hold out for what we believe to be the what everyone wants to hear.
Yeah. So how, just really digging into the detail here of your process. So if you do a call for papers or call for speakers, and you get, let's say you get 100 submissions, how do you then evaluate those? Do you bring in the advisory group and ask them to get their eyeballs on it, or how does that process work?
We do that internally. So we also have PPTI. My co-founder, he is our sort of head of editorial, but more of our head of content. And he's the editor for the magazine. So he has excellent knowledge of the industry. I often say that he is considered an industry expert, although he would deny that. But yes, so we do that internally. We review it. If there's any that we have question marks, so we might ask one of the advisors for their opinion and for some feedback. But most of that's done in-house.
Just done internally. Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Once you've got all that content, how are you sort of maximizing the value that you get from it? Are you recording all the sessions at the conference and then transcribing them, and so like what are you doing with that content?
Yeah, I suppose we're a bit different because we have a digital platform. We have a digital magazine. We run monthly webinars. We do interviews. We do podcasts. So we produce a lot of digital content. So we use our in-person events as a place to bring people together in person. So there's no option to attend virtually. We do sometimes record the presentations and give access to the attendees afterwards, but it's something where you have to be there to actually get the benefit. So of course people can get the PDFs and the recordings if they've attended, but it is not something where we then sell it at a reduced price for a wider audience.
So you keep it premium. That allows you to keep people wanting to come to the show rather than just think, I won't bother going. I'll just watch it all online afterwards. Yeah,
exactly. The show is much more than just content. If we just wanted to share content, we could do that just as well with virtual events. But it's also a place to meet people in person, to shake hands, to have that chance meeting over a coffee. One of our speakers from a recent show was saying how much he likes people just putting their hand up to ask a question. because he then knows, oh, I can go and find that person in the networking and have a chat with them because it was a really good question and I want to go into more detail. And even the ideas of having apps where you can ask questions. Of course, we use show apps at our events because they are really valuable, but there's drawbacks to them as well. Just putting your hand up and asking a question can spark an entire conversation, and we try and make sure that we make the most of everyone being there in person.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think there are definitely different approaches to that. Some people will be like trying to squeeze as much value as possible out of a bit of content, but equally valid is just make the content as premium as possible. Okay, so the next question, full disclosure for anyone watching this. Seb is a client of Lineup Ninja. So this is really I'm not trying to feed you a line to plug our product. But, as a startup founder myself, I know that often resources are very limited. And so anything that can give you efficiencies and allow you to achieve more with fewer resources is useful. So apart from Lineup Ninja, are there any other hot tips or tricks you've got for people, that like things that you've done that have allowed you to punch a bit above your weight as a startup?
Yeah, that's a good question. Any sort of automation is useful if you're a small team, whether it just be management systems automatically notifying people. I know you don't want to give me a line to promote it, but just being able to easily get to grips with what's happening with a conference with a small team is really useful, and just maybe one or two people to manage 100 speakers is possible. But yeah, automation, streamlining, freelance help is always really helpful to just bring on for a few hours, and you can then make use of someone's expertise without major additional costs. But yeah, getting value and getting a streamlined process with a small team can be a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any sort of final messages that you would give to another founder? Like if you were starting today, what would you have liked to have heard from someone who had founded a show? Like words of wisdom or kind of key things that you've learned in the process?
Yeah. I suppose if you're building a show, there's always that mentality of if you build it, they will come. And I think that is important to keep in mind. If you truly have conviction that you're creating the right product for the right audience, then that often is the case. But that is not an attitude to replace industry research and researching your product, researching your market heavily before you start to build an offering. And when you do, there are inexpensive ways that you can start to test your market. So anyone can create a newsletter now. It's cheap, it's really effective. You can build data and you can find key people. LinkedIn is an amazing tool. So as you're finding who your audience is, well, you can find your audience without major expense nowadays, and you don't have to go all out with an exhibition straight away and risk the house and everything.
So I guess that's the digital products, the online first meetings in the early days, future-proof group media. Awesome. Anything you'd like to plug that you'd like to sell?
For us, that we would like to sell.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone's interested in alternative proteins or ag tech or vertical farming, our newsletters are a great place. But
I can attest to that because I received your newsletter. So
you?
Yeah, do yeah. Always interesting.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah,
that's really good to hear. So yeah, I mean, we're always happy to get feedback on that as well. So no, I suppose that would be good to see people sign up for. And if they fancy an in-person event, we're in Chicago later this month for the Future of Protein Production, and then again in Amsterdam this October.
Awesome. Great. Well, given that you're in Chicago later this month, you must be incredibly busy. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me and coming on here and telling me a bit about your journey and how you're approaching things. It's been super interesting. Yeah. I think it just remains for me to say thank you very much, Seb. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more from you in the future and seeing the continued growth of Future Proof Group Media.